Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, what we've got in front of us today is a bit of a potential doozy, because we've got a video by none other than Mr. Moose on Caffeine. And this is the situation regarding Moose on Caffeine and our channel. We've reacted to this guy in the past, and we had some criticism for some of the past content that he's made, with one of the biggest points of criticism being, well, it seems like he's critiquing some of these games, or making like these analysis pieces, without necessarily having the experience of actually played them. And that's something that he did for ZZZ, that's something that he did for Wuthering Waves. I do believe the past video where that actually occurred was rating gacha games free-to-play friendliness from worst to best. And then you've got the misinformation video that followed afterwards, right? After we, did a little bit of digging into the points that were being made. And so, hopefully, I've heard that this one's actually well-researched, well done, and well-made. And I just want to see rating endgame content, whether or not there's been some big improvements made. Is Mr. Moose on Caffeine on a bit of a redemption arc? Let's check it out.
Hi! Welcome back. In any gacha game that you play, endgame content is some of the most important content that exists, because after you're done with everything the game has to offer, which with this genre, that'll probably happen quite frequently, there's nothing else to do. I hear quite a lot of people say that endgame content is unimportant, or it's just for a little extra currency, but that sentiment is incredibly incorrect, as endgame content is one of the biggest drivers for player retention when content is dry. So in this video, we're going to take a bunch of gacha games like I usually do, and we're going to rank their endgame content from worst to best.
Alright, so first things first, I want to say that his definition of endgame content, all of that, is entirely correct. And thank you, Ray69, for the 10 gifties. Appreciate you, brother, man. Thank you a bunch. So yeah, when it comes to his definition of endgame content, something that is keeping players retained, that is keeping players, going through some of the dry patches after they've, gone ahead and completed all of the events in the tab, after they completed all the new area, after they completed all the new story. Yeah, that kind of is the one reason why they're being kept there. And a lot of other stuff bundles into the endgame, right? Why are you farming gear? Why are you rolling echoes? Why are you grinding relics? Why are you grinding domains? It's all so that you can have the gear to be able to tackle the endgame. Because God knows that the event content, the story content, all of that stuff doesn't require you to have thoroughly built characters. So basically all of like the different, side activities that you have in the game, the main bits of progression, yeah, they're all tied to the endgame. So those comments that it doesn't matter, all of that, completely agree that they're wrong. So yeah, I think it's a great take from Moose over here on this one.
We've got the most popular mainstream gacha games, as well as your guys' favorite, as well as my favorite gacha games in this video, so stick around. But before we get started, we're getting very close to 10,000 subscribers, so make sure to like and subscribe, because I'm going to be doing a giveaway when we do, and you should also join the Express Train Discord server for a lovely community to hang out with. Now let's get onto it. So the rules are going to be as follows. I'm trying to make my ratings way less arbitrary and more detailed, so I've got to—
I appreciate that. I think it's a W thing over here to go ahead and set that clarification up front, especially following, right, the past situation where it was like, oh, it felt like you were kind of just saying things subjectively without having, kind of like the factual stuff to back it up. So awesome there.
Detailed rating system here. There will be a base rating of 1 out of 10 for each game for symmetry's sake, and 3 criteria, each with a score out of 3. So with a base rating of 1 out of 10, and if each criteria receives a 3 out of 3, the final score will be a 10 out of 10. The 3 criteria will be enemy quality, how well designed the enemies are, how fun they are to fight when it comes to mechanics and the amount of HP they have, as well as how frequently they are reused in the endgame content. Mode quality, as in how well designed the modes are, how unique they are from each other, and how fun they are to play. The final criteria is FTP accessibility, which means we're going to talk about HP inflation and power creep again.
Okay.
Yay! This is a very self-explanatory criteria and is also very objective, so no further explanations there. For the final rules, I'm not going to count events as endgame content unless it's basically the only content available in the game, and exploration is also not counted as endgame content. I will either be taking modes that the community considers to be endgame content, or I'll be taking any modes that exist and seeing if they fit the definition of content that is made to test your account. So again, exploration and most events, as well as any modes that buff you up to oblivion, so the roguelikes or roguelites, whatever they are in ZZZ, HSR, and WoW, for example, don't count. Oh, and the list is in order from worst to best, just as usual. So, with all these rules out of the way, let's get started. We're going to start off with Limbus Company, and while this game is one of the most beloved gacha games of all time by its...
Whenever people talk about this game, one thing that's clear to my mind is that they don't talk about the endgame. I know that for certain. Nobody really talks about the endgame in Limbus Company. As far as I'm concerned, I don't even know if some people know it has an endgame. So I'm not really surprised to see it. Maybe closer to like the tail end of this list. Probably because of that. Also, when it comes to like the rules, the classifications, all that other stuff, I think that that's a fair point of view. I think that's like a fair classification system that he's set up. I don't really have any complaints with it, so I'm just interested in seeing how he's gonna fit, you know, all these different games under that under all three of those umbrellas.
Player base, they all collectively hate the endgame content.
Okay, so yeah, I guess what I was saying before, the preamble for Limbus Company, that was pretty much spot on.
So it has two modes, Mirror Dungeons and Refraction Railways, the latter of which barely even exists. It only resets once a season, so around once every 7 months.
Is that their endgame mode resets once every 7 months? That's crazy.
The other mode, Mirror Dungeons, though, resets once every week. You can either do a hard Mirror Dungeon to get all the rewards, or 3 lower difficulty ones. Now, Mirror Dungeon is a roguelite mode, and unfortunately, it is one of those modes that really buffs up your account quite heavily.
So, this is basically like if the only endgame move I had was the TOA resets once every 7 months, and then Fantasy's 1,000 Gateways. That's the only endgame, and you do it once a week. That is Limbus Company's endgame. Oh my lord.
To the point where, in Mirror Dungeons, a lot of the progression your account can see inside of it is just clearing faster than before. However, because Limbus Company has no other modes besides this and the railways, I'm going to have to penalize it to make up for that. Just a quick PSA though, while editing this video, 5 extra floors have been added to Mirror Dungeons in the name of Extreme Mirror Dungeons. However, I don't think they add enough to warrant a different rating than what I'm going to give. If anything, you can add a score of 0.5 to the mode quality section. However, I don't think I'm going to do that here. So, to start off with enemy quality, in Limbus Company, enemies are very well designed.
A post-editing fix. I respect that.
They have many different mechanics that you have to play around, and while I myself don't enjoy the combat in Limbus, and it actually was the reason I stopped playing this game because I'm a gameplay first type of guy, those who do find the combat fun also find the enemies very well designed and fun to play against. However, since the railways rotate so infrequently, they have the same enemies for a whole season. The Mirror Dungeons mode also receives a lot of complaints about how repetitive combat feels inside of it, and to move around that, players started making their own challenges to even have fun in the game, like solo runs. In the end, I'll give it half credit for having very well designed enemies, but playing against those enemies does feel repetitive, so 1.5 out of 3. When it comes to mode quality, well, to be fully fair, Mirror Dungeons does have a few challenges.
I'm taking a look at some of the critiques that are being given over here, and I just want to do a quick double check with chat. Are there any actual Limbus players in here that can corroborate some of the takes being made? Obviously, when I hear some of the facts about, oh, it's taken like a month, all of that, all of those things, or sorry, it takes like 7 months for a reset. Yeah, I get it, right? He's spitting here, right? Because I feel like a lot of people don't really end up even talking about this game's endgame in the first place. I haven't heard anyone ever talk about it as like a highlight of the game. It seems a little cope. Are you saying he's making it look better than it is? He's actually overplaying it. It's worse than how he's saying. So he's actually painting it in a more positive light than what it actually is. Is that what's going on over here? I understand that you play Limbus Company. I'm asking the people that play Limbus Company if what he's saying is like correct. And like you guys just keep answering that question with, yes, I play Limbus Company. But then you don't answer the second question of, is what he's saying correct? Like, literally, the chat is just full of people talking about how they play the game, but nobody's answering the actual question. He's sugarcoating it. Okay, so, to reiterate the question I was asking before, so he's making the game actually look better than how it actually is. He's actually overplaying how good it is. He has a bit of a positive bias for it. And so it's actually, in practice, a little bit worse than what he's saying. Okay, that's all I wanted to check in on. Okay, great.
Achievements aside from its usual gameplay, so aside from players making their own challenges, they can also try their hand at Mirror Dungeons as challenges. However, that still didn't stop players from complaining about how repetitive Mirror Dungeons is. Refraction Railways isn't much better, again, because it rotates so damn slowly. My opinion, as well as the community's opinion, is the same. Both modes are incredibly boring. To give an example that appeals to a wider audience, imagine that in Honkai Star Rail, Apocalyptic Shadow and Pure Fiction didn't exist, and the MOC only rotated once every 4 patches or so, and the only other piece of content you could do was the Divergent Universe. It would get pretty damn boring, wouldn't it?
I think that's a good analogy. I think we made the same one for Wuwa, and yeah, let's be entirely honest here, that kind of sounds like shit.
Unfortunately, in this criteria, Limbus Company will receive a 0 out of 3. When it comes to F2P accessibility though, you can clear the game with basically anyone. Again, remember that in Mirror Dungeons you can do solo runs, and those solo runs could be with basically any character in the game. Refraction Railways is also very similar, allowing you to use so many different characters. Either way, you can also just get every single character in the game by just grinding. So in F2P accessibility, Limbus Company will receive a full score of 3 out of 3.
I think that's fair. Yeah, based off that definition, that sounds fair to me. You can do whatever the fuck you want, because there's not really any difficulty factored into it. It also doesn't reset, and it's also... Yeah, okay, that's just... Yeah, I see why nobody talks about this game's endgame as like a positive part about it.
However, like we said, Limbus will be penalized because Mirror Dungeons is the only endgame content that frequently rotates, but it's a roguelite mode that really buffs up your account, so I'm going to take away the 1 out of 10 base rating, which means Limbus Company will receive a final score of 4.5 out of 10. Unfortunately, the lowest on the list. Next up, we've got Genshin Impact, somehow not the lowest on the list.
Yeah, Limbus Company to say for that one, because yeah, I'm already estimating the scores for this. It has to be higher than a 4.5, and I'm already beginning to like theory craft. If the scores are based off of enemy design, floor design, and then free-to-play accessibility, where did Genshin get any points from?
Even though I expected it to be. Genshin Impact has 3 modes: the Spiral Abyss, Imaginarium Theater, and Stygian Onslaught.
The only one that feels slightly playable is Spiral Abyss out of these 3, by the way. Yeah, the only one that feels slightly playable is Spiral Abyss, and Spiral Abyss already feels bad.
The Spiral Abyss being your box standard tower mode with a pretty solid foundation, but handled pretty badly, just like...
And the design of it and the structure isn't even the problem. It's the fucking enemies, the buffs, all that other shit that they put in that's the problem.
Like the rest of the game, basically. Solid foundation, terrible handling.
Yeah.
Imaginarium Theater is a more advanced version of the Spiral Abyss, but not in a very good way. For example, you're restricted to only using a few elements and a few guest characters. Stygian Onslaught is definitely the best mode, by far in my opinion. It's similar to Honkai Star Rail's Apocalyptic Shadow, but it's much more of a whale mode at higher difficulties, which some players might not like.
You know what? I don't think that's actually that bad of a take. If Stygian Onslaught just wasn't balanced around you having C6 characters, I don't think it would actually... I think it would actually be pretty decent. Now that I think about it, yeah. It's just 3 bosses that you do, 3 challenge stages with like a shorter amount of time, and then you're just supposed to go in and kill the bosses, right? The problem is that they have difficulties in there that you can't do it without the specific characters and the specific constellations. And it's also the enemies that they put in are straight up diseased. And so if the enemies weren't ass, and then the buffs weren't ass, and then like the enemies didn't have as much HP at the higher difficulties, it would probably be their best one. No shield mechanics, none of that stuff. None of this like, oh, if you don't use lunar electro charge, you deal no damage. Like if they didn't have, it's all the extra shit added on top of it that make Stygian Onslaught awful. But the baseline structure of it, I can agree that it's not actually bad. It's actually decent, if not good. But it's tainted by all the other shit added on top. It's like a good cake. And then you put poo as the frosting. I don't really need to go much further than that. That's literally what it is.
So let's start with enemy quality. Outside of Stygian Onslaught, enemies in Genshin Impact are very bad. They have very boring AI that feels inconsistent between enemies. Even then, there are no true parry and dodge mechanics, so you can never even benefit from enemies attacking you like you can in other games like Zenless Zone Zero. Some boss enemies also have invincibility windows that don't stop the endgame timer when they're active, like Magu Kenki waking up and the Ruin Serpent going underground. All of this combines to also mean that Genshin Impact's enemies, recent HP inflation put aside, have a lot of HP in relative to how fun they are to fight. They really are just punching bags with a few elemental checks here and there, which makes the combat so goddamn boring.
I love that he is facing this enemy specifically, because this has to be one of the most annoying fucking bosses to fight in the game. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I don't know anybody that actually enjoys this battle. And the best part about all this is that you have the Hu Tao double Hydro team, right? Which is actually it was a good team. But it's so bad against this boss because you just have, like, no ability to deal with the shields. And it's just like, hey, guys, elemental shields, aren't they so much fun? No, they're one of the worst mechanics in Genshin Impact. But they keep putting them into the game. These fucking elemental shields. I swear to God, these are, like, the worst mechanic that anyone could have ever thought of. And it's just been, like, accepted, integrated into the gameplay, and it's something that they're, like, spamming. They've been spamming it since like version 3.0 or something of the game. Like every fucking enemy has had one of these.
In the Spiral Abyss and Imaginarium Theater, enemies are also reused so frequently it makes doing these modes feel like such a chore. Looking at the enemy lineups for these two modes in all of 5.x, they're chock full of almost 2-year-old enemies released in Fontaine, which isn't that bad, but also super old enemies released in Sumeru and even Inazuma.
I don't have an issue at all with the older enemies from Sumeru and Inazuma being in the Spiral Abyss or any of the other endgame modes, because those enemies don't feel fucking diseased to fight. The enemies from Fontaine, Sumeru, so on and so forth, Inazuma, they don't feel like fucking shit to fight. Like everything else in like Natlan or wherever else where they all have shields, they all have Night Soul mechanics, they all have all this bullshit where it's like, if you don't have this specific character, go fuck yourself. That is like Natlan, and that's probably Nod Cry as well. So the more old enemies you have, the better the actual gameplay experience probably is. Unless you have all the newest characters, of course.
Now, these two modes have a lot of chambers, which means that they're gonna want a lot of enemies to fill them up, so they end up reusing older enemies, but that just ends up making it feel like more of a chore to do. In Stygian Onslaught, though, the enemies have unique mechanics, and that's basically all I have to say about this criteria when it comes to this mode. So, I'll give it a 1 out of 3, failing in 2 modes, but doing pretty well in the third, or at least relatively well.
I think Stygian Onslaught, I think he's being way too generous with it. Because the gimmicks that they put on the Stygian Onslaught enemies are, unless you bring this one character, you will not be able to clear. Those are like the modifiers that he's talking about. Yes, there's potential for the modifiers to actually be okay, to actually be something helpful, to actually be like something that improves the combat, but that's not how they're currently being used in Stygian Onslaught. So I would dare say that 1 could be a 0 depending on how you view the integration of the buffs. But I would say like the overall system, yeah, it's not like the worst thing ever.
When it comes to mode quality, then there's nothing really wrong with the Spiral Abyss like we said, other than the enemies it's filled with. Its mechanics are completely fine. With Imaginarium Theater, that's where it starts going downhill, as the mechanics can get very restrictive or have requirements that some accounts may not have, and while yes, it does incentivize building many characters, in a game like Genshin Impact, it ends up not being very enjoyable for many because of the elemental restrictions.
That and the fact that when you play this game mode at the highest difficulty, you effectively need to organize 20 to 25 artifact sets on your account, just for the units that you're putting on the roster for the clear. Like, before you do this reset of the Imaginarium Theater, you have to go gear 20 to 25 units. That alone takes you like a fucking hour, if not longer, to do that. It literally feels like you are doing chores, just transferring artifact sets from 1/4 of your roster to another 4th. It's like, oh, I've got to go move my emblem set from my Xingqiu back to my fucking Zhangling, or vice versa, and then you're just doing that for like 10 hours and there's no loadouts. Ah!
Stygian Onslaught, on the other hand, is a pretty well-designed mode, unique enemies, high difficulties for the whales, and actually well-designed challenging combat. The only bad thing about this mode is that it's still just a race against time, just like the other two modes unfortunately, but the timer's also very short. It'll receive a 1 out of 3 here as well.
Stygian Onslaught is good. Spiral Abyss is fine. Imaginarium Theater's mechanics are restrictive. I don't view this overall score as the worst thing ever. I think it's actually okay. He's subtracting half a point for they're all just a race against time. This is my take. I think that this should be more of like a neutral thing. No plus or minus. And Imaginarium Theater's mechanics being restrictive should be like a -1. And so low-key, this should be like a 0.5 out of 3. I don't know how there's not like a negative score for Imaginarium Theater's mechanics being insanely restricted. That's my take. And the whole time-based thing, I don't think that that's too much of like a net negative if this one's not going to be. Again, that's just my feedback on this. But overall, I'd say, yeah, I would go for a 0.5 to 1.
Finally, when it comes to FTP accessibility, then while it's starting to get worse, you can still clear the game with many older units, and more skilled players can clear with almost any unit, except maybe Xinyan or something. Although I do think, and you'll probably agree with me, that Genshin's player base is very casual, and so increasing HP like they've been doing recently is very scummy and cucks their player base even more than they've been doing over the years. But this video isn't about that, so I'll give it a 2 out of 3 here.
I think 2 out of 3. He's already listed out the reasoning. I think he's underestimating how bad HP inflation has gotten in the game. I think he's underestimating how much certain characters like Mava Week and Sitlali have raised the damage ceiling. Again, I think he's being a little bit too positive. I think he's painting some of these games in a bit. I think he has some rose-tinted whatever, something going on. I think this score is actually too high. And I do think that the research is done. It's just kind of like the scores being given out are just a little bit too high. Because yes, the HP inflation is 100% there. The power creep is 100% there. There are a lot of older units you can't clear on. There are a lot of older limited 5-star units that you can't clear on because they don't, their teams, whatever, it's not enough. And no investment's going to be enough. And the only 4-star units people are clearing with, guys, and the only older units people are clearing with is like some dumb shit international team with like Jing Cho, Bennett, Zhang Ling, and like some combo of like other stuff. Those are the teams people are clearing with because those characters are broken. They're stronger than other the characters that the 4-stars that people are clearing with that everyone shows the showcases of, right? The I Win to Lose showcases, all of those. Those 4-star units are stronger than half the 5-star units in the game. When's the last time you saw a Hu Tao clear? When's the last time you saw a Eula clear? When's the last time you saw a Klee clear at C0? You see more Zhang Ling clears than Klee clears. But then people are talking about, look, the 4-star units can still... What about Klee? Hey, when's the last time you saw a Venti? So yeah, that's where I think the whole 4-star narrative part, that kind of falls apart a little bit. It is what it is. I would rate it closer to a 0.5 or 1.
Definitely end up getting worse, just like it did with the 2 other Hoyo games that begin with Honkai. So Genshin Impact will receive a final score of 5 out of 10.
If my adjustments were made, where it's a 0.5 over here and a 1 over here, it would be on the lowest. It would be a 3.5 out of 10 instead of a 5. So I can see why he has it in the second place. I think he's really overshooting the free-to-play accessibility and the mode quality stuff.
Speaking of Honkai, we've got Honkai Star Rail up next, with its 3 modes, Memory of Chaos, Pure Fiction, and Apocalyptic Shadow.
Don't worry, the new one came out. I'll give you my take on the new one as well.
There's a rumored
It's like a anomaly arbitration.
or leaked 4th mode coming, but I'm obviously not counting it. So Memory of Chaos is your box standard tower mode, Pure Fiction is the AoE mode, and Apocalyptic Shadow is the boss mode. And they all rotate 1 by 1 every 2 weeks. Nothing else I have to explain about them. So let's get right into it. When it comes to enemy quality, well, outside of HP inflation, Honkai Star Rail has incredibly simple combat, and while it used to have incredibly simple enemy designs, in recent updates they've definitely added more fleshed out mechanics outside the Apocalyptic Shadow.
Yeah, the mechanics they added are just kind of like not fun. I'm going to be honest with you. If you go ahead and you actually read up on some of the mechanics that enemies do, they're like a whole like MLA fucking 5-page essay describing one ability. And it's like, if you're at the point where the actual complexity in this game comes from the enemies having 5-page long kits, while the character kits are like 1/8 the size of the enemy kits. And so it's like, you'll read it and you'll be like, the enemy will actually, upon getting hit 5 times, will trigger an ether storm of nebula that will start increasing the damage that your team starts taking once every 3 turns. And afterwards, after building up to a pinnacle point of 35, after 2 action values have surpassed, then they will nuke your team for 5 million damage. Like, the enemy kits in this game have gotten fucking crazy. In terms of, like, half the shit that will go on. Like, an enemy will go through and, like, do, like, 7 attacks in a row. And you'll just be like, okay, like, wait, how did that happen? And then you see, oh, it was actually triggered by meeting these special conditions that were started in the first turn of the fight. I feel like people are just finding out half the shit the first time because God knows nobody's fucking reading what these kits have in them.
And even though a lot of those mechanics chill certain characters way too damn much, it's still an improvement. But either way, Honkai Star Rail also reuses enemies so damn much, but I wouldn't say as much as Genshin, but that's mainly due to Genshin having 3 chambers for 2 halves in each stage, while HSR just has 2 halves for each stage. Pure Fiction also reuses enemies quite often, probably more than the MOC because there's more enemies on the field. However, both of these modes suffer from using many bosses way too many times, like Svarog and the bugs in the MOC, as well as Gepard in Pure Fiction, and they also suffer from another issue, which is that so many damn enemies are just reskins. Multi-billion-dollar company that's probably closer to multi-hundred-billion-dollar company here, and it's making enemy reskins. Genuinely pathetic. Enemies in the Apocalyptic Shadow are also reused quite often, unfortunately.
I think enemy reskins in a turn-based game is kind of wild. Because, let's just be honest here, guys. Much like how HSR only has 3 buttons, the enemies have like 2. So it's like, not even like a case where you can be like, oh, they're already like reusing assets in one way. They're only doing like 1 or 2 new attacks, too.
Fortunately, with Cocolia being the biggest offender, and when comparing it to Stygian Onslaught, I'm not sure if the latter will start reusing their bosses too. I mean, probably. However, I do think I will excuse the reuse of enemies here because I'm very biased towards Apocalyptic Shadow because it's a very fun mode that I used to enjoy a lot. And the only thing really bad about it is the very obvious HP inflation. Now, even though newer enemies have been getting more mechanics, those mechanics are not only heavily catered to newer characters, but they still tend to use older bosses like Svarog in the MOC that have no mechanics whatsoever and are instead just a punching bag. And no, him throwing his arm to grab you is not a mechanic, it's just annoying. I think I'm going to give Honkai Star Rail a 1.5 out of 3 here.
Old enemy design is boring, while the new enemy design is fucked up. Actually true. MOC and Pure Fiction reuse enemies. I don't really view the reusing enemies points as like a negative. So I'm actually okay with the fact that there's not like a plus or minus over here. Apocalyptic Shadow still has amazing enemy design. Okay, so this 1.5 is literally just inflated by the fact that this guy likes Apocalyptic Shadow. Hey, at least he's upfront about it. Hey, it is what it is. So, I guess in general, it would be closer to like a 0.5 or a 1 if you were simply just less biased for one of the game modes.
Uses enemies a lot, and with older characters they can feel like punching bags like in Genshin, but the Apocalyptic Shadow is way too good to ignore here, and I would also say Honkai Star Rail's enemies are more fun to fight than Genshin Impact's enemies, but that is subjective and some people would say otherwise. But since this is my list, I'm going to give Honkai Star Rail an extra 0.5 here over Genshin because of that. When it comes to mode quality, well, all 3 modes are effectively a race against time, however they do play quite differently. Regardless of HP inflation and power creep, the mechanics of each mode are very fun when put in a vacuum. It's just the race against time factor that is shared between them which holds it back. If Apocalyptic Shadow was more like the holograms in Wuthering Waves, what focuses on the boss itself and its mechanics a lot more than the timer, it would have been a lot better for example, but I don't see an issue with the MOC being a race against time because it's the standard endgame mode. So in the end I'll give it a 2.5 out of 3 here.
MOC is alright, +1. Apocalyptic Shadow is really fun. I'm definitely biased towards it, +2. But Pure Fiction is just okay, and they're all just a race against time, so it's minus 0.5. This seems like the most subjective rating that he's given so far, so I wouldn't personally, like, read too much into it if you have your own opinions on how good the game modes are. Yeah, I mean, it's mostly being boosted up or down, literally based off the fact of, I really like Apocalyptic Shadow, or I really don't like the timer. That's really what it seems like. So, I would just say overall the mode quality, AES has always been alright. I would give that a point. MOC, I would also give a point. Pure Fiction, I would just say, at least play around with the buffs, so I would give it half a point. I would still have like a 2.5 score, because I don't think the structure of these modes is like off in any way. It's more so the combination of the buffs, the HP inflation, all that other stuff that brings them down. So yeah, the design of the modes I don't think is necessarily an issue with these ones.
2.5 out of 3 here. When it comes to F2P accessibility, yeah,
okay, this has got to be a 0.
This game will receive a whopping 0.
Hey, I fucking knew it! And this is the thing. This is why I say that his Genshin rating is too high, because Genshin literally feels like HSR in terms of its free-to-play accessibility in the current times. It really does. And the only thing preventing people from fully realizing that Genshin literally is the new HSR is the fact that people are running these stupid-ass fucking Zhang Ling, Bennett, Jingqiu clears, where the 4-star units are once again stronger than 5-star units. They're stronger than them. They're clearing with those teams and then saying, look, I used free-to-play units. See? Look how accessible this is. When those 4 stars are just fucking broken, and you will never do that with any other 4-star in the fucking game.
Out of 3, because obviously. So, Honkai Star Rail's final score will be a 5 out of 10, just like Genshin Impact. Some people may reduce enemy quality even further, or possibly penalize HSR for being so damn F2P unfriendly, but I think I'm satisfied with this rating.
Yeah, I think that's literally what we did. Mode quality is the same score, but then enemy stuff and the free-to-play stuff, you could add some additional. I think his HSR rating was incredibly accurate.
Next up, we've got Fate Grand Order. This is of course a story-based game, and it shows with its endgame content. However, I think it fares a lot better than Limbus Company, for example. FGO doesn't really have any rotating endgame though, which is kinda rough. Its two main sources of content are completing the hardest story fights every time a new story chapter is released, and any challenge quest an event is released with. Events
I'm mainly just listening here. I don't know very much about FGO's endgame, so I might ask chat some questions as well.
have at least one challenge quest, with some having more, but with that out of the way, let's get into the ratings. When it comes to enemy quality, this game probably has some of the most unique enemies out of any game on the list. It's a shame there's no rotating endgame content to make use out of all of them. Every playable character can potentially be an enemy, and they can use their playable skills on you in their enemy form. Of course, there are also non-playable character enemies, all with their own unique characteristics and mechanics that make them either weaker or stronger against certain characters. Other than that, there's not much else to say,
I mean, hey, I just got some interesting ideas posed. We all remember the fucking 2.6 main story quest where we literally fought against Augusta, and that was kind of a fun fight. And Augusta was literally using, like, her own kit attack. She even had, like, her time freeze, like, built in. Not gonna lie. I think this is why it's helpful watching content from other games, even if you don't play them or necessarily know about them, because now that I'm hearing about this, I'm just like, wait, why can't Augusta, with her story fight, be in, like, the TOA or something like that? Right?
I think that a 3 out of 3 here is a very good rating. When it comes to mode quality, though...
Yeah, I would say that's fair. That does seem like... As long as there's variety outside of just the characters, then yeah, I can see why it's a 3 out of 3.
Well, since FGO has no rotating endgame content, this is where it's gonna struggle. However, its challenge quests and major story fights are still very well made. Each challenge quest has an enemy with their default mechanics, but also extra gimmicks on top of that. I guess kinda like Apocalyptic Shadow and Honkai Star Rail, but a lot more complicated. The most recent challenge quest on the NA version of Fate Grand Order is the Summer 2025 event's challenge quest. The short of it is that you need to kill the boss with a name that I'm never going to pronounce, and an outfit that I should probably censor because this is Fate Grand Order. But anyway, she has insane defense buffs that you have to kill all the enemies on the site to remove. Each enemy has their own different buffs and debuffs that they can apply, and in the end, it kinda starts playing like a puzzle, which I think is really fun. However, I really can't get over the fact that all you do in this game is level up your characters and do the story quests and challenge quests. So, despite how fun these modes can be, a 0 out of 3 is the only rating I can give here. I'm sorry, if you don't care about always having something to do though, it's definitely a 3 out of 3 instead. When it comes to F2P accessibility, then
Wait, why'd he give it a dog shit score?
I think it's really fun. However, I really can't get over the fact that all you do in this game is level up your characters and do the story quests and challenge quests. So, despite...
Even though the challenge quests are well made, not only can some of them be extremely easy to the point of where you can ignore mechanics, they also don't rotate. Okay, so it's like you can just go months without ever doing the endgame, or having new stuff to do. So they just release like one thing every once in a while, and then it's like, there's your end game, brother. But otherwise, you're just horizontally investing, and there's nothing else left to do. This rating's fair, if that's true.
How fun these modes can be, a 0 out of 3 is the only rating I can give here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd probably quit this game. There's a reason why I don't play it.
If you don't care about always having something to do though, it's definitely a 3 out of 3 instead. When it comes to F2P accessibility, then there's two sides to Fate Grand Order. Now, you can beat the content in this game with basically any unit, but it's really tough to beat the game with the units you want to beat it with, because the gacha system is so ass, which I've already spoken about multiple times on this channel. Although, because you can still beat the game with skill and skill only, I'll give it a 2 out of 3 in the end.
So you can beat the game with any character, but it's really a pain in the fucking ass to get characters. Okay.
Fate Grand Order's final rating will be a 6 out of 10. Yes, somehow higher than Genshin and HSR, even though it has no rotating endgame content.
Yeah, I guess that's entirely being carried right now by the enemy quality score. So I guess it, I guess if that really seems to be the key differentiator over here. Because there's, without a doubt, you can't say that the quality of FGO's characters are at the same level of Genshin, HSR, any of that. Same with the enemies as well, right? There's undeniably more work put into designing all of the enemies and stuff. But it's Hoyo making their enemies instead of adding to the gameplay, they're detracting from it. Where, yeah, there's more effort, more resources put into the design, but these enemies' abilities, all of that, they're literally making the game worse. It's like a 2 steps forward, 5 steps back sort of situation for Hoyoverse.
It just goes to show how repetitive and unfair these two games can objectively be. The next game on the list is Epic 7, and just like a couple other games on the list, it has so many endgame modes it's kind of absurd. Of course, it is a PvP game, but still has many PvE elements, and while people may already cast it aside, I don't think that's very fair to this game. Its multiple PvE modes include the Abyss, Rift, and Trials of Constellations. The Abyss is a non-rotating tower mode with 120 floors and an extra 20 harder levels. The Rift is one of the game's most efficient ways to farm, and Trials of Constellations is also another way to farm, with small roguelike elements, but it's also a lot more rigid than Rifts. Now, since I don't have much experience with Epic 7, I'll only be focusing on these 3 modes. Epic 7 players can make their own judgments, and any rating changes by you guys in the comments would be very much appreciated. But
hey, I'm glad that he's giving these disclaimers up front if they're games that he doesn't have that much experience with. Okay, nice.
Keep in mind I'm also writing this script with the help of somebody who calls themselves the Epic 7 Glazer. And bear in mind that in this list we're only focusing on PvE content and not any PvP content. So let's start with enemy quality. Now, the Abyss doesn't rotate, however, each level is unique with its own set of mechanics and enemies. That may sound bad for F2P players, but hang on for the F2P accessibility section in a bit. Rift rotations come in seasons, with each season rotating around once every 6 months, and each season has its own boss. You do fight the same boss for the whole season, unfortunately, so as a mode widely considered as endgame by the player base, it does end up just being something that you have to press the fun button for. When it comes to Trials of Constellations, then while these reset monthly, every reset has the same 5 bosses. There are other modes with more unique enemies and mechanics, like Halls of Trials though, so Epic 7 doesn't really fail here. I'll give it a 2 out of 3 when it comes to the enemy quality. If anything, the mechanics this game has definitely make up for any lack of unique enemies. When it comes to mode quality, then first off...
Okay, so they just repeat too many bosses, but the mechanics are good. But it's just the same bosses over and over and over again. It would be like in the TOA if all you got was the gorilla, Scar, and like some other, I don't know, like the Ikes. And those were the only 3 enemies that you got every time.
There's always something to do in Epic 7, whether PvE or PvP, but a lot of those things that are always available to do focus a lot more on PvP. While the more important PvE game modes rotate less frequently, or at least not as frequently as other games. Now, how fun these modes are is the same story as earlier, since enemies are kinda repetitive in them. I mean, basically, these PvE modes are mostly just to farm to do better in PvP content, but in this list, we're only rating PvE content. Since they're mostly just for farming, a lot less effort is put into them, but that's definitely not a knock on Epic 7, since the PvP content this game has to offer is actually pretty damn good. Here, I'll give it a 1.5 out of 3. When it comes to F2P accessibility, then Epic 7 isn't really a saint, but it's not really a demon either. First off, since a lot of the game's PvE endgame content relies on farming, you can have a guess that so much of that is because of RNG gearing systems. You do need a lot of equipment and gacha characters in Epic 7, and if we consider the Abyss to be the benchmark of how good the endgame content is for F2P players, then it's definitely not the best. If somebody is able to clear the Abyss with only F2P units, it will require some RNG luck during the battles themselves. However, the game isn't predatory either, giving you a lot of currency and time to get the units that you do need to beat the content. You can actually farm in modes like Hunts, where it can sometimes drop bookmarks or skystones, which is the pull currency in the game, although kinda rarely. I'll give it a 2 out of 3 here, I think that's fair, so in the end, Epic 7 will have a final score of 6.5 out of 10 for its PvE endgame content.
Okay, I mean, that... I don't personally know too much about whether or not this score is that accurate, but I will say the reasoning that he gave, I would dare say that he like underrated some of the pieces. So maybe like it's actually higher for some people. The critiques seem relatively fair for me. It's just I think the free-to-play accessibility one that's probably the one that people can be a lot more subjective on, just depending on, you know, yes, you might be able to beat it, but you did say it's based off like the gearing. And then there's like the whole thing with like ML units as well. Do you need those for some of the stages? I don't really know.
The next game on the list will be Wuthering Waves, with Tower of Adversity, Whimpering Wastes, and the holograms as well. I think holograms are some of the best endgame content Wuthering Waves has to offer, with them simply being a skill check. The 5-minute timer will never run out unless you're fighting something way above your level. So, the Tower of Adversity is your box standard tower mode, and Whimpering Wastes is just Wuthering Waves' answer to HSR's Pure Fiction.
This is definitely a take from some people. I think that if you're drawing equivalencies between Pure Fiction and Whimpering Wastes, this is my take. It's an end game mode with a lot of enemies. And the more enemies that you kill within this time frame, the higher your score is. You want to know another game where your goal is to get as many points as possible in a time limit? Tetris. Yes. Fucking Tetris is also another fucking game that's literally designed exactly like this. You're trying to clear as many floors as possible in Tetris within a time limit. Just like how in these game modes, your goal is to kill as many enemies as possible. And it's like the concept of a game having a mode where you just get more points the more stuff that you kill is like, guys, Hoyoverse didn't invent that. And so I'm not going to knock this comparison too much. I just want to let people understand the idea of like, hey guys, you want to know a game where you had to kill a boss before the where you have to kill a boss before the time runs out? Yeah, you guys remember Spider-Man from the PS1? You guys remember the PS1 Spider-Man? Yeah, that's a game where you had a timer, and if you don't kill this boss by the time the timer ends, you fail the stage. Does that mean that Spiral Abyss is a copy of Spider-Man 1? Guys, it's just because if Hoyo does something, that doesn't mean that anything that's in a slightly similar way, with the main concept being killing a bunch of enemies, that doesn't mean that it's a copy of what Hoyoverse did. So that's just my preamble on this, because I've heard this so often that it's like, if you're gonna be that loose to say that something is a copy or a response to, brother, then we're just copies of fucking gorillas, man, because we both got hands and feet and faces. Like, look, but you know that's not the fucking case.
So a mode where you get hordes thrown at you and you have to defeat them in a certain amount of time to get a score. So let's get right into the ratings. When it comes to enemy quality, unfortunately, Wuthering Waves also reuses enemies quite often. From all the stages I've looked through, it seems to be just as much as Honkai Star Rail. Although, Wuthering Waves is just over a year old, so they don't have as many enemies as games like HSR and Genshin. However, I don't see why we need to be fighting a 1.0 boss in the TOA more than a year later.
So, this is where his lack of experience is unfortunately fucking Mr. Moose a little bit. The Lampy Lumen has not shown up in a single TOA until version like 2 point something. So the Lampy Lumen is actually effectively a new boss, because it had never shown up until I believe around version 2.3 or 2.4. So yeah, this point over here that it's like a 1.0 boss, it's never been in the endgame. Until very, very recently.
Now, my biggest complaint here is that the enemies in Wuthering Waves can be really fucking annoying. Now, to be completely honest, that is probably a skill issue, but I'm also playing ZZZ while having nearly zero complaints about the enemies other than them having a few invincibility windows here and there, while in Wuthering Waves, so many enemies are genuinely super irritating to fight. Other than a few extremes like Lorelei being a little if you don't kill her fast enough, she ends
Wuthering Waves is too hard for him. That's fine. The holograms are too hard.
Annoying phase a boss has ever had in any recent ARPG, and Thundering Memphis thinking he's Virgil, but really he's just a little too.
I hope your whole family has a nice Christmas!
Wuthering Waves really likes to punish the
He just gets skill issued by like those two specific bosses that I guess. This is the thing, right? I've got holograms that I hate as well. Right? I've got some bosses that I absolutely despise in terms of like their moveset or design. But I'm not going to say it's a problem with the devs that I can't deal with it. Unless it is literally bugged like Mia is. So yeah, I mean, I find the Tempest Memphis to be a great fight. I have fun with the Tempest Memphis. Lorelei is kind of fun as well because you can steal her HP things and like basically become invulnerable if you steal her healing. So that's a cool thing you can do. So yeah, I mean, it just sounds like these bosses are taking him to fucking town.
Player, and again, you can call that a skill issue as much as you want.
I mean, the Tempest Memphis is pretty well designed, to be honest. Like, it doesn't really seem to have, like, any crazy stuff. It's just, yeah. I think if the Tempest Memphis is the enemy that you're calling out, it is 1,000,000% a skill issue there.
To me, it ends up being way more annoying than it is fun. Obviously, Wuthering Waves won't get a 3 out of 3 here, because it reuses enemies so damn frequently, and because
the most that I've seen frequent enemies dinged as a score is negative 0.5. But for Wuthering Waves, after we've already said that the game hasn't been live for that long, so the lack of enemy quality isn't that big of a deal, it's also the biggest penalty that he's had. So I do think that naturally there's a little bit of consistencies. You can actually go back and look at all the other ratings here. This is the largest that enemy reuse has dinged a score on his end. But he's also given the excuse for the game that it hasn't been out for that long, so it's not that big of a deal that the enemies are reused, but it's the most severe decrease in the score. Just something to think about over here. I think that negative bias towards Woo-Wop is dragging his score down over here. And once again, this is his list. We've also seen enemies reused very often, not even come with a negative modifier. So let me just bookmark this, 1831. For HSR over here, reusing enemies resulted in no decrease in the score. But then here it's a minus 0.75. So it's just like, it's like stuff like this that I just feel like people need to be aware of. Some things are getting dinged down, some things are not. Once again, I think it's just bias at play. I just think he's not actually, I think he's kind of bad at Wuthering Waves. And like literally, otherwise, I'm not sure why this is getting a lower score because of this when all the other games didn't get it. That's just my take. I don't know what the explanation is. Like, I've got a headcanon stuff. Enemies are also pretty damn annoying to fight. So, like I said, negative bias because he's bad at the game. So, yeah, so it's just... There are some enemies that absolutely cook his ass, so that's a minus 0.75. And there's a random minus 0.75 for something that we didn't ding other games for. So, yeah, I mean, otherwise it's good. Obviously, this enemy quality thing should be closer to like a 2 or a 2.5 if the tier list was less biased based off the ratings and the explanations given. So, yeah, I think it's just getting dinged down a lot because of personal bias.
Because it reuses enemies so damn frequently, and because I think fighting the enemies can be genuinely quite frustrating, I think I'll give it a 1.5 out of 3. However, that is very subjective, and if you don't think Wuwa's enemy design is annoying, I think a 2 or a 2.25 out of 3 here is perfect.
Also, for the repetitive enemies part, I don't think that really is the case at all, to be honest. They've been using and adding in a bunch of new mobs. For the enemy variety thing, I think it definitely has to be. Looking back on a lot of the... I'm taking a look at his explanation for the enemy variety piece. He's looking back at a lot of, like, the 1.0 resets. And without a doubt, the resets before 2.0 had a lot of enemy reuse. And let me just look at... The resets before 2.0, right, had a lot of enemy reuse because 2.0 introduced about, like, 500 mobs. Not like 500. They introduced, like, 80 more echoes. Maybe 50 more enemies, right, in 2.0. And they've been using them a lot in the TOA. So kind of like after that, I don't really think that's been like the take that... I don't really think like this take over here that there's a shit ton of reuse is that accurate. But if you're looking at like past Hakushins and stuff like that, I could see how you could come to that realization. But in actual practice, I don't really think this is even a thing. I feel like most players would say that as well. But yeah, feel free to give your own take on it.
Because it reuses enemies so damn frequently, and because I think fighting the enemies can be genuinely quite frustrating, I think I'll give it a 1.5 out of 3. However, that is very subjective, and if you don't think Wuwa's enemy design is annoying, I think a 2 or a 2.25 out of 3 here is perfect. I also gave HSR a score of 1.5 out of 3, and a lot of people might get really mad about that, and understandably so. However, they have the same score, but for different reasons. Again, if
I just find it funny that he brings up the HSR one that literally tells you that reuse is not getting a score reduction. Like... I feel like this alone should probably be enough to tell you something about, like, what's going on.
Understandably so. However, they have the same score, but for different reasons. Again, if you don't think Wuthering Waves' enemies are annoying, I think they deserve
at least he's addressing it.
2.25 out of 3.
At least he's addressing it.
When it comes to mode quality, then the TOA as a tower mode is completely fine. It's a little more unique with its cost system than the MOC and Spiral Abyss, but Whimpering Wastes is pretty boring, I won't lie to you. But I also think that the holograms are some of the best modern endgame content available, being a pure skill check rather than anything, even if some enemies are annoying, but we're talking about mode quality here, not the enemies themselves. Honestly, if the holograms had some feature where they rotated, maybe if it was more similar to Deadly Assault and Zenless Zone Zero, I think a rating of 3 out of 3 here would have been a very heavy understatement. However, I think I'll give Wuthering Waves a 2.5 out of 3 here. I also gave HSR a 2.5 out of 3 here, and that sounds 0.5 out of 3.5 out of...
Tower Adversity is just the tower mode. Holograms are amazing. Whimpering Waste is boring.
of 3 here. I also gave HSR a 2.5 out of 3 here, and that sounds insane, but I think that Pure Fiction, despite still being relatively boring, is still much more fun than Whimpering Waves. Either way, I think Wuthering Waves has a lot of potential with whatever upcoming mode they may be cooking. When it comes to FTP friendliness, then there was a character shilling drama with Whimpering Waves a couple weeks ago, but honestly I think it's just a fluke. I'm gonna give Wuthering Waves the benefit of the doubt here, because other than that, you can clear with all units in the game, and the echo investment needed to do so is miles below any relic or artifact investment needed in HSR or Genshin.
Good recognition of that. Yes. When you look at the builds that you need in HSR or Genshin, they're absolutely fucking disgusting. That is without a doubt the case. They are disgusting.
On both older and newer characters. I would say that Wuthering Waves is like 70% skill and 30% echo and gacha luck, and for reference, Genshin Impact is 80% luck and 20% skill, and HSR is like 100% luck and 0% skill. With that said, I'll give Wuthering Waves a 3 out of 3 here. So, Wuthering...
I would say you could definitely bump it down by half a point after the introduction of the tower, because one thing that's for certain is that based off the current balancing, you do feel like you need... If you're using a character that doesn't have a really good standard option, you feel like you would need a signature weapon. For example, like a Jinsei, who, if she uses the standard Broadblade, she's going to be dog cheeks, right? Not very good, probably not able to clear the new tower. That's the situation where you feel like you kind of do need her weapon to do it. And I've already, made my takes on that. You reasonably have already been given multiple weapons as a free-to-play from like the free pulls, the shop resets, all of that. So the idea of having a signature isn't really an issue. It's just more so, yeah, if you're going to be taking on the new hazard floors, you probably should use the team that has a signature available. And you should have multiple. You should have multiple available by that point. So, yeah.
Wuthering Waves' final score will be an 8 out of 10.
I would dare say the only disagreement that I really have over here is over, like, the reuse and the enemy annoyance things. Once again, I think, like, the adjusted score, once you take out some of the personal bias, and I think, like, just a teeny bit of misinfo on the enemy reuse thing with the Lampy Lumen and all of that, it's probably more normalized at a score of about 2.5. So, reasonably, it should be closer to, like, a 9 out of 10. That's what I think is a more less bias, cutting out the fat, the slight bit of misinfo. I think it makes sense as a 9, though. But yeah, I think the rating also knocked down a little bit, as well as in free-to-play accessibility, for an 8.5 out of 10. So, yeah. That would be my score, using the criteria and using the reasoning that he gave with some adjustments. Overall, not bad. Not bad overall. But still, just like, a little bit of extra research on the Lampy Lumen as well as the enemy reuse thing, I think would have made this section a lot, close to perfect.
We got Zenless Zone Zero, the 4th and final mainstream gacha game, or at least what I would consider.
And so we got ZZZ rated higher again.
To be
let's hear it out.
It's definitely the Hoyo game with the best endgame.
Maybe he's spitting.
At least. It's got 2 rotating endgame modes, Shiyu Defense and Deadly Assault. Shiyu Defense is the box standard tower mode, and Deadly Assault is everything Stygian Onslaught and Apocalyptic Shadow should have been, and what a rotating holograms mode should look like.
I've already got some points ready to go that will take free-to-play accessibility, and basically ZZZ's free-to-play accessibility, with some of the new information that we found out, no matter what it is, it's a 0. And we'll explain why.
There's also the simulated battle trial.
So, at a whole, ZZZ already has to be lower.
Which are some of the best modern endgame content available. Already, ZZZ is getting glazed, so let's get right into the ratings. When it comes to enemy quality, then ZZZ is going to get some pretty good credit here. First of all, unfortunately, they also do reuse enemies quite a lot. Probably a little less than HSR and WUA, but also I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, let's not play any games here. Deadly Assault is like literally the definition of enemy reuse. Like, let's stop playing here. They introduce a new enemy and then they cycle through that. They cycle them through the fucking ringer like 4 fucking times, and then they move out. That's if clearly, once again, there's a negative bias for Wuba and there's an extreme positive bias for ZZZ. That much is clear if we're going to say that ZZZ doesn't have as much enemy reuse as other games. It 1,000,000% does at like a much higher degree than HSR or Wuba combined.
Surprised if it was just the same, but definitely not as much as Genshin though. Although, just like Wuthering Waves, it's only a little over.
You wanna know how badly they're reusing the enemies? They just took the Jane and Hugo bosses and then stuck miasma on them and then reintroduced them. If that isn't the definition of lazy reuse, I don't know what is. They just took miasma and slapped it onto Jane and slapped it onto Hugo and then shoved them back into Shiyu. This is what I mean by positive bias, ladies and gentlemen. Is he going to address it? If he doesn't, you know what I'm saying.
Over a year old, so it will by default get a better score than both Genshin and Honkai Star Rail when it comes to this. Other than that,
And listen to this part.
Wuthering Waves, it's only a little over a year old, so it's quite a lot. Probably a little less than HSR and WoA, but also I wouldn't be surprised if it was just the same. But definitely not as much as Genshin though. Although, just like Wuthering Waves, it's only a little over a year old, so it will by default get a better score than both Genshin and Honkai Star Rail when it comes to this.
So I better see a 0.75 reduction for ZZZ as well. If I see a 0.75 reduction for lack of enemy variability, then yeah, okay, then that's fair, but we'll see.
Other than that, when it comes to how fun the enemies are to fight, then they are incredibly fun. I am absolutely in love with Zenless Zone Zero's combat. The
Remember what I said about positive bias?
enemies are part of the reason why. They attack at just the right frequency and difficulty that they need to. The enemies also have a very good HP to mechanics ratio, again because you benefit from all the parrying that you do. The only bad thing about Zenless Zone Zero
Like, bro was out here freaking out that the Tempest Mephis has parryable attacks, and like now he's like, I love parrying! The Tempest Mephis, it's just too frustrating! But this, I love it!
Zero's enemies off the top of my head is that some of them, like Miasmic Jane, or some second phase bosses like the Dead and Butcher, have invincibility windows, but other than that, I think ZZZ currently has the best enemy design in any mainstream ARPG, or mainstream gacha in general. I'll give Zenless Zone Zero a 2.25 out of 3 here.
Okay, you know what? I think this is fair. Hey, I'll give credit where credit's due. He gave the same exact score reduction to ZZZ that he gave to Wuwa for the enemy reuse. Though I will say, I don't actually think Wuwa even has enemy reuse to the degree that he's talking about. But I do think that he is being fair in the deductions. But again, based off of what I said in the Wuwa section before, I just don't think this is actually an issue in Wuthering Waves because there's a lot of fucking enemies in there. Some people may dislike Miasma, but I had no issues with it personally. I think this is the thing. Personally, I view ZZZ and the fact that it will... So this is the thing. There are endgame modes like Deadly Assault, and there are endgame modes like Shiyu Defense, where the ZZZ devs have intentionally put in mechanics that make certain types of characters less effective against them. For example, anomaly characters are one of the most popular types of characters in ZZZ, and they deal anomaly damage. The ZZZ devs have put in a hidden nerf to all the enemies in the endgame that makes their anomaly build up slower. And basically shadow debuffs that make those characters perform worse. And that being in the game at a baseline, hidden nerfs behind the scenes to make some characters better than others, or make some matchups feel really bad for characters that aren't clear, I think that automatically is like a minus 1.5 on enemy design. Putting in shit like that behind the scenes that nobody knows about until they test it out and they have to find out that, oh, I'm just randomly doing less damage, that's insane. So I view that as this should really be closer to like a 0.75 or a 1, entirely based off how these devs are using their enemies to show characters in the endgame to a really, really, really absurdly high degree nowadays. They've even gone so far to, as in Deadly Assault, they just have taglines that say, this enemy takes 25% less anomaly damage.
When it comes to enemy quality, they do reuse enemies a bunch, but probably not as much as the other mainstream games, and the enemies are super fun to fight.
Probably not as much. ZZZ reuses way more enemies than Wuthering Waves. That is just without a doubt a fact. The fact that there's Miasmic Hugo and there's Miasmic Jane and all of that, those don't count as new enemies.
When it comes to mode quality, like Wuthering Waves, it does only have 2 rotating modes unfortunately, Shiyu Defense being the standard kill them as fast as possible mode, which is fine because it was also the first mode, but Deadly Assault also brings a different formula because you actually get performance points in it that aren't simply based on doing as much damage as possible, meaning that somebody who can't exactly do enough damage to fully get the score required to 3-star can supplement that with taking advantage of the other ways you can get points in this mode.
Unfortunately, performance points are both a pro and a con, where sometimes performance points are just given out for free, but performance points can also be extremely restrictive, to the point where you'll have certain characters where if you use them, you won't be able to get the performance points. because they require the use of a certain mechanic that only parts of the roster have. For example, dealing anomaly damage can be considered a way to get performance points. But if you don't have an anomaly character free to use on that deadly assault stage, well, you're getting 0 performance points for that run.
And you don't even need to fully clear all 3 bosses to get all the Polycorn rewards. If you only have 2 fully built teams or one of the bosses has a resistance you can't fight against, you don't have to fully clear them. Shiyu Defense and Deadly Assault also rotate weekly with each other instead of bi-weekly like all the other games. ZZZ has a lot of potential with the possible 3rd rotating mode. I really hope they don't mess it up. Finally, there's the simulated battle trials, which, like I said, I also think is some of the best endgame content in modern gacha gaming. Again, basically just being a skill check. I'm pretty sure Billy Main was able to solo floor 1000, which is really crazy. I think it's really good. I have no reason to give ZZZ anything but a 3 out of 3.
I think that the overall design of the modes is not inherently bad. Like I said before, that PP performance points example that I gave can't be considered a detractor. But I would, this is talking about the design of the modes, not like actually the buffs. This is talking about like the buff system. The systems that are set up, not the actual levers that the devs are pulling. And don't worry, that I've already explained that for other sections. This is assuming that, like, the Shiyu defense buffs weren't annoying. This is assuming that, like, the devs aren't putting shadow nerfs behind the scenes. This isn't assuming, right, that devs are going in and adding, this enemy takes 30% less damage from anomaly. This is merely the fact that, like, the systems are there to allow them to do that. But just like how the devs at Hoyoverse can fuck up a game with bad buffs, they can make a game feel a lot better with good buffs. And so I don't really view this as the most shield score ever. And again, I think when you're focusing on this being the design of it, I don't think it's necessarily too inaccurate.
Finally, when it comes to F2P accessibility, well, you can beat the game with basically anyone you want.
And this is where the score is going to diverge. ZZZ is effectively at a 0 out of 3. And the reason why I'll describe it as a 0 out of 3 just up front is the fact that those shadow nerfs occurred. Anomaly was the top of the meta for ZZZ, and the strategy for free-to-play players was to simply build out multiple Anomaly teams because they were performing exceptionally well, and were great investments. The ZZZ devs have then gone ahead, and after you've done your pulls, you spent your resources, you spent all of your battery to build these characters, grind their disk drives, do all of that, they then nerfed every single Anomaly character in the game, unless you pulled Yazuha. Then Yazuha undoes the shadow nerfs that they did behind the scenes to Anomaly buildup and makes your characters function normally again. That is the most free-to-play unfriendly shit I've ever seen. They bait you into pulling an entire roster of Anomaly characters, then nerf the baseline performance of every Anomaly character across the board, and then force you to pull another one to be able to play Anomaly again. But guess what? You only have one Yazuha. So if you were the person that was running Anomaly on both sides, well, Yazuha can only be on one of those sides, so get ready to just go ahead and fuck yourself, free-to-play players, if you decided to invest in Anomaly, which was literally the best thing that you could do in the first couple of months of the game. And so, yeah, it's a 0 out of 3 for me, because you have devs going in and retroactively nerfing characters, and then creating characters to go solve the nerfs that they decided to put in. Without any announcement, by the way. Without any announcement at all, by the way. So yeah, 0 out of 3. Nothing he says here can change that fundamental issue that I talked about before.
You can see people clearing with many different characters, even main DPS bed bigger, which I think is great, although you shouldn't ignore the HP inflation. Now, I actually think that this amount of HP inflation that is currently in ZZZ is pretty healthy, due to the players getting a lot stronger from getting better disk drives, more access to support units, etc, etc. But F2P accessibility is very objective, just like I said in the rules, and so just because players can clear with every unit doesn't mean that I'll give it a 3 out of 3 here. The biggest reason for that is disk drive investment requirements are very high if you're using older units to clear. Going back to earlier, I would...
And then think about all the disk drive investments you made in all these Anomaly characters that just got nerfed.
Say that ZZZ is 50% skill-based and 50% disk drive or gacha luck-based, so I'll just give it a 2 out of 3 here.
My take is 0, once again. But I do think that 2 out of 3 is actually... I actually expected it to be a bit higher than this. I actually expected it to be a little bit higher than this.
Just need to grind discs for a while if you want to use older characters. I just absolutely hate all RNG gearing systems. HP inflation might get worse in the future, after all it is a Hoyo game, but let's stick to the present in this video, so...
I wonder what this guy's score would have been if he knew about the Anomaly nerfs the Yuzuha fixing the anomaly nerfs, and like every single anomaly character being less valuable after Hoyo's shadow nerfs. I do wonder, because I feel like a lot of stuff here would be adjusted. That's my take. I think based off the reasoning that I provided you alone, I just think he doesn't know about it. Because otherwise, how can you say it's free to play accessible if they just retroactively nerfed all of them? All of the characters that somebody might have pulled. There's no way. So yeah, ZZZ, it can't be that high up here.
Zenless Zone Zero's final score will be 8.25 out of 10.
I think it's closer to a, put in a 0 over here. It's close to like a, I think it would be closer to like a 5 or 6. Yeah, it's basically I would say ZZZ's endgame is 1/2 quarter step above Genshin and HSR.
Coming up next, we've got my favorite gacha game of all time, the Battle Cats. With some of the best strategy gameplay in the gacha space, Battle Cats also has some pretty good endgame content.
Okay, I'm just going to be honest over here. This recording is close to 1 hour and 13 minutes long. I think we've heard him out pretty well for the games that we probably care about. I know I mentioned before about watching content about games that you maybe don't care about, but I really don't care about Battle Cats, and I really don't care about Arknights. I'm sure he does an okay job of covering them because he plays them a lot more. And I think we looked at the parts over here that the audience is probably going to be the most interested in. So I think we'll cap it off over here. I think we gave a pretty balanced perspective on the takes that Mr. Moose has been providing. I do think he's not really Moose on cocaine anymore. Maybe a little bit too biased in some of the takes that he made, but overall, I think it was a fine video. And he made sure to preface everything, right, by saying this is my incredible personal bias. And the other take that I'll make is I think he kind of sucks at Wuwa if the Tempest Mephis is the one that's making him rip his hairs out. Because like I'm gonna be real here. How are you fighting Miasma Jane and being like, I love this, and then the Tempest Mephis is making you shit bricks? I'm just gonna be honest. I feel like Miasmic Jane is like 70 times more fucking annoying than ever fighting something like the Tempest Mephis. That's my take, but that's going to be my personal bias coming into effect. So, yeah, overall, I would say actually a pretty solid video. Some key little bits of either misinfo or missing information for the ZZZ and the Wuwa sections, but I can definitely understand somebody not having the full context over there, right? And none of the stuff that he was wrong about is as bad as making a statement like Wuwa has no soft pity, which is something that he said before. But I think he's done quite a bit more research this time. And overall, I would say pretty enjoyable vid. Let me know what you all thought about this one, ladies and gentlemen, and peace.